We actually need autumn inflow at about 66% above normal to refill reservoirs by the end of the year.
I still believe in the market's ability to regulate this. But it means, okay, we are having high prices. We will be on par with continental prices.
Probably by the end of the year, we will have a hydro reservoir filling in NO2 somewhere between 46 and 67, maybe even 70%.
Europe is sweltering. Heat wave after heat wave. Droughts, drastically low river levels have all pressurized power generation and led to increased price volatility. In Norway, a combination of factors, including low rainfall, have reduced hydropower reservoir levels in Norway to their lowest for 30 years. What does this mean for prices, for imports and exports out of the country, especially given the context of the wars in Iran and Ukraine? I'm very pleased to be joined by Gert Ove Mollestad, who's Montel's editor in Norway. A warm welcome to you, Gert, and good to have you back on the pod.
Thank you. Nice to be back.
We're going to be focusing mainly on the area which is where you're from in Norway, really, Gert, isn't it? Now, not everybody follows the situation or the hydrological situation away closely. How unusual is the current situation?
It's fairly unusual, I would say. We have had really low levels of snow this winter and also a quite dry spring and summer. So the reservoir levels in NO2 is now on the lowest level since 1996. Yeah, we're close to a 30-year low here. So it's rather unprecedented.
What does that mean for power markets, not just in Norway, but in the Nordic region?
We have a much tighter price coupling now than we usually have. The price in southern Norway has been more or less the same as in Germany for the whole year on average, which means that the normal exports flowing from Norway, and in particular southern Norway, this is where the interconnector comes in, is more or less halted. So we have a small export so far this year, but Norway is not kind of the surplus country as it usually is.
And so everyone's hoping for rain, I guess. What's the outlook now?
Well, it's still dry, unfortunately. So I think the latest forecast is about a half or a bit more wet than a half of normal amounts. And the autumn is usually the most wet season here in Norway. So it's not a very good outlook today, at least.
I mean, looking forward, we're seeing more and more of these dry periods. What are you hearing in the market? How are people preparing for this? There's on one side, you've got the power producers who's got to manage the water levels quite closely, but also the consumers. What are you hearing?
We talked to a lot of producers lately, and they are not very concerned. They're open for, there's not an energy crisis looming, but there might be a price crisis coming, that this winter might be quite expensive, and that will hurt particularly small scale businesses, since they are not hedging their volumes that much. And as we all know, that consumers, you and I, we are safeguarded by the Norges price scheme. So the government is paying our bill.
We talked in the past about Norway being the battery for Europe. Are those days gone?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. We still have a structural surplus. This year, it won't be as charged up as it usually is, but there's still a lot of flexibility in the Norwegian hydro system. So given short periods of very high demand on the continent and thereby high prices, Norway will be able to export, but there will not be this regular constant export as we have had usually previous years. And also in occasion of periods of very low wind, for instance, in the Nordic, then Norway will most likely be a net importer. So then we will fetch power from Germany, Denmark, and the UK.
Good. Thanks very much for setting the scene.
Always a pleasure.
How concerned should markets be, especially given the extreme weather and a fast-moving, unpredictable geopolitical environment? I spoke to 3 Nordic hydropower experts to find out. I'm delighted to be joined this week by Gro Klabber of Volue Data and Forecasts, Silje Eriksson Holmen of Volt Power, and Sigbjørn Sæland of Storm Geo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're seeing very dramatic pictures across Europe, across southeastern Europe, across Rhine in France, where river levels are extremely low and hydro reservoirs are also very low. What's the situation in the Nordics currently, Sigbjørn?
It's a natural place to start with the hydrological situation in the Nordic region and in southern Norway in particular. The situation is weak. We have a deficit of around 17 terawatt hours in the Norwegian hydro reservoirs and around 10 terawatt hours deficit in NO2, the southwestern part of Norway. So the situation is bad in a way. But we have been here before. It's quite a long time since, but the situation was quite similar in 1996, actually 30 years ago. My first year in the power market, so I remember that situation quite well, actually.
Silja, are we at 30-year levels here, or have we, can you describe how it compares to seasonal norms, the current situation?
As Sigbjørn says, it's the lowest for this time of year since 1996. It's below both the 2022 energy crisis and also the 2018 drought. So we're currently at around 48% filling rate in NO2. The rest of southern Norway is also low, around 56% if we count NO2, NO3 and 5 altogether.
Should we be worried about these very low hydropower levels?
Depends on what your concerns are. Are you focusing on sort of energy security, or are you worried about the price levels?
I think both.
Yes, I mean, Nordic it's a surplus area. We have ample surplus in the ballpark of 50 terawatt hours per year. So most likely we can recover over time, energy-wise, and the market is responding to the signal. Export has been reduced, and comparing to 2022, which was where sort of export was more or less regulated, where hydropower producers in the south were obliged to report how much they produced. We see that then the August levels was approximately 1,700 gigawatt, and currently they are just below 2,500. So I think the market is taking care of this. We see that we have reduced the export to the Netherlands and Germany a lot. To UK, still there's something, but I still believe in the market's ability to regulate this. But it means, okay, we are having high prices. We will be on par with continental prices for a while, probably until the end of this year, depending a bit on the development.
So no real security of supply risk, but prices could spike. Is that your view as well, Sigbjørn?
Hydropower producers in NO2, they have increased their water values quite substantially. So they are dealing with the situation. So I would say no reason to be worried, but obviously everyone pays attention to the situation. But as Gro says, hydropower production volumes have been reduced. Water values in NO2 as an average is close to 160 euros per megawatt hour, well above German baseload price level for the rest of this year, and not so far away from German peak price level for the rest of the year. So obviously that is, showing that the market is dealing with this situation, and that is no big surprise. I mentioned that 1996 was my first year in the power market. Obviously, a lot of things have changed since then, but I would say that the hydropower producers in NO2, they behave in exactly the same way as they did then, and the supply curve in NO2 would have looked the same back in 1996. The market has been here before and will deal with this situation. Obviously, the possible price range for this autumn and winter is big. Probably by the end of the year, we will have hydro reservoir filling in NO2 somewhere between 46 and 67, maybe even 70% hydro reservoir filling. So in the worst case, we will end up end of year around where we were in 1996, or we could, in a very wet autumn, end up with close to normal hydro reservoirs in NO2. But bidding strategies have been adjusted to reflect the current weak hydrological situation.
Yeah, some very interesting points there, and I think obviously everything depends on the weather, on the rainfall, and the weather gods, if you like. But see, when you said a wide price range, could you go into details there? What kind of price range are we talking about? The highs and the lows.
Yeah, that is from average prices, let's say September until end of year, or at least during Q4 of this year. We can have prices in NO2 below 100 as an average if we have, a wet autumn, like for instance in 2017. Or we could end up above 200 euros per megawatt hour as an average price if we have a dry, cold autumn.
Yeah. And we're talking spot prices here, the system price. Yeah.
This is the NO2.
NO2 price, yeah. Absolutely. Silja, do you agree with what the sort of forecast or the expectations for the autumn here?
Yeah, well, it all comes down to the weather, I would say. So we really need very wet autumn to refill reservoirs to normal. So inflow is low at the moment. It's been dry lately. We are dependent on that the weather forecasts look wet to fill reservoirs. We need a lot of rain. We don't need just a normal rainy autumn. At the moment, NO2 has a deficit from normal of close to 10 terawatt hours. So we actually need autumn inflow at about 66% above normal to refill reservoirs by the end of the year, according to our analysis.
May I chime in here?
Of course, Scroll. Yeah, come in.
Now we are in the normal, a very dry period. I mean, August is normally very dry, but as we are entering September, this is a month with a lot of variation and also normally a lot of inflow. So following the forecast 2 weeks ahead and 2 to 6 weeks ahead will tell us a lot more. So now we are sort of at the beginning of a very interesting period. I agree with both Sigbjørn on the price level and Silja that, okay, we need more than normal to reach normal levels. There's very little chance that we will be above normal. So our prediction is also that particularly southern Norway will end up below the median at the end of the year. But September is key.
So back to you, Silja.
I would say that, yes, of course, September is variable and we will know a lot more in the weeks to come. But the weather forecast and the seasonal forecasts don't look very promising. I have looked at the weather forecast and the seasonal forecast for autumn, and the dominant regime seems to be high pressure over the Nordics, which will probably give drier conditions than normal. And of course it's uncertain, but the odds of a very wet autumn is quite slim. It's difficult to look too far ahead with weather forecast, but at least the next coming months doesn't look very wet. So we analyzed this by replaying every autumn since 1990 from today's level, while keeping production normal. And what we found is that we need more inflow than any of the last 36 autumns to make it. So, of course, if producers hold output lower than normal, that will help, but it's not likely that we will refill to normal by the end of 2026. Of course, it also depends on the winter, the snowfall, the snowpack melting next season. So I don't think it's a crisis, but I don't think it's likely that we will fill up to normal by this year.
But suddenly NO2 faces very high prices. Sigbjørn, you'd like to come in?
Yeah, so definitely it's not to be expected that we will be anywhere close to a normal situation by the end of the year. Our forecasted NO2 reservoir filling by the end of the year is maybe around 55-56%, which is obviously low, but not any dramatic situation. And I think it's always interesting to look into the market and see what is sort of could be read from the market. And you see that the NO2 price in the market is currently close to 120 euros per megawatt hour, which is quite low, I would say. So either the market has not sort of put too much attention to it, or the market is thinking that this will be no problem. But compared to the current bidding strategies from producers in NO2, where they price their flexible water, typically in the range, or very much of it in the range of 150-60 euros per megawatt hour. I would say that the market price of 120 euros per megawatt hour for NO2 Q4 26 is too low. I would say that it's quite much below where we think the NO2 average price will be.
So, listeners and viewers, you've been told the price will increase most probably here in Q4. I'm also interested. We're talking about NO2, Gro, and that's obviously the southern Norway in particular. What about the rest of Norway and the rest of the Nordics in particular? What's happening there? There's obviously more hydropower in the north of Norway than there is in the south. But how does that play onto prices as well?
The hydrological situation, I mean, NO2 is the most severe, but also NO5 is having a large deficit.
NO5 being which area?
The West Coast.
West Coast, thanks. Yeah.
Famous for its notorious rain. And I've heard it been a rainy summer, but still, I mean, the hydrological balance is below normal. Also in NO3, the middle part of Norway where I'm sitting and where it's been raining the whole summer, is in deficit. So the north is still approximately 3 terawatt hour in surplus. They've had the excess inflow and also sort of challenging with exporting the surplus. Sweden is overall more balanced, a little bit deficit in the north, SE1, which from our is reflecting a kind of a changing pattern after that we got the Aurora line last year, open November. So sort of export capacities from SE1 has. So it's mainly a problem in southern Norway, I would say. And also the middle part of Norway, represented by NO3, is latching on with the increased capacity southward after the Øland-Sogndal cable opening October last year. So we're seeing the impact of that. Of course, the grid capacity put limits to the price shock. So NO2 will be sort of latching on to German prices, and gradually this wears off as we have bottlenecks, the grid going further and further north. But also the other areas can expect high prices in the coming autumn.
But not in the same level as we're seeing in southern Norway then?
Yeah, it gets the most direct hit because of the cables to Netherlands, Germany, and the UK. Yes,
I like to stick with the cable issue here at Sigbjørn. I mean, interconnectors and cables are often heavily criticised in some areas in Norway for increasing prices rather than keeping prices low, and it's often been political hot potato. What's your view here? Can the interconnectors come to the aid of Norway in terms of both security of supply and keeping prices a bit lower? Or was the opposite true?
Yeah, definitely. If we have a dry autumn with low inflows to NO2, obviously the system will import more and more, and the sea cables will contribute to keeping prices relatively low. They will not be low, but relatively low. Sea cables, definitely. And maybe a bit more important now than before due to this price. It's a fixed price for all households in Norway that choose to go for that. It's very cheap. It's around 40 euros per megawatt hour. So that has removed the electricity consumption elasticity from households in southern Norway. Last time we were in this bad situation back in 1996, we saw eventually that households and industries cut back on consumption quite a bit, and that element is not that evident this year due to this fixed price for households, and that leaves more of the job to the interconnectors. But the import capacity is plentiful. Energy will be have a high price potentially, but there will not be an energy crisis due to the very huge import capacity on the sea cables.
Yeah, maybe that point needs to be made more in the public sphere, maybe. But I'm also thinking, with the Strait of Hormuz remaining closed, Norway will also be affected by potential upswings in the gas price, right? And in Germany, if Germany doesn't fill its gas storage facilities, prices could rise quite substantially there, which would impact certainly prices in southern Norway, again, probably on the upside, right?
Definitely. Prices or offer prices from hydropower in NO2 is very closely linked to the price of natural gas or the marginal cost for the combined cycle gas turbines, which reflects into German futures, baseload futures price. So that link is very obvious. The price in NO2 is very exposed to the development in the Middle East. That's for sure.
Before I turn to you, Silje, would you like to come in there, Gro, about the sort of the link with the gas situation in continental Europe?
If you look at the exchange with Germany now, we see that basically we utilize the capacity in both directions several times a day. So we are already importing a lot of cheap surplus power in the middle of the day and then exporting in the peaks. And then it's sort of the battle is what happens during the sort of more medium priced night prices. So will be sort of baseload night prices or not. I think looking at the export to Germany, for the past month, we have a slight surplus, but it's much lower than it used to be due to this heavy daytime. So we are actually absorbing cheap power, but because of the hydrological situation, the water values is so high. So the capacity is large enough in this deficit that we get this very high price contamination. And of course, that's exacerbated by the situation with low river levels in Europe, high peaks from cooling demand in the evening. We see the growth in heat pumps that also have a sort of second as cooling devices in the evening. That electrification is taking its toll in Europe, and we see it in the peak pricing. So we are affected by this, yes.
Very high demands and very volatile as well in terms of the daily price curve. Absolutely, Gro. In continental Europe, that is. Silje, going into the winter, what are the biggest uncertainties that we face here in the Nordics?
Of course, the weather. So we are dependent on wet weather forecasts. The political situation, Hormuz Strait, this is also something that that will impact the winter prices that we need to follow. We don't know yet how the winter will be, if it will be a cold winter or a warm winter. So demand is very relevant.
I mean, I think that links also to Sigbjørn's point about the Nordic police and the retail pride, and the incentive to cut back on consumption is maybe not there, or not going to be so clear in the winter months. Absolutely, Gro. I'd like to round off with a final question for all three of you. Now we're seeing drought, dry weather, low hydropower, run of river, reservoirs, all very low levels in certain parts of Europe. Are dry periods becoming a more significant market risk, Gro?
Yes, and I think Silje could answer this better, but the climate is changing. And what's happening? We get more extreme weather, we get more drought, especially the south is more perceptible to drought. But also on the other end, we get more extreme precipitation, so concentration of precipitation. Maybe not so heavily in the south, maybe more in the west and north coast. So the weather is getting more extreme. Yeah, it's a peak in the future where it will be more volatile.
I'd like to round off with you, Silje, but first to Sigbjørn.
Climate change impacts, precipitation inflows, seasonality. But, from a market perspective, I don't see that climate risk has fundamentally changed the way hydropower producers manage their reservoirs. Obviously, they need to plan for more volatility, but basically they do their optimization business as always, I would say.
As they did in 1996 when you started, Sigbjørn. Yes.
Exactly. I think that's an interesting point, actually, that basically, with all the changes, more interconnectors, more wind and solar, but the optimization problem for hydropower producers is the same, and they behave basically in the same way.
Thank you very much, Sigbjørn. And finally to you, Silje. So dry periods, drought, is this the new normal?
Yes, it is, I would say. So we have been seeing more and more droughts the last years. And it's of course, we can't really prove a trend from a handful of years. It's still quite early, but what the climate signal points to is a widening of the range. So we get more heavy rain and flooding, and also more drought, more drier years. So this is quite evident, and most projections point to the Nordics getting somewhat wetter on average in the future. So the raw resource may even grow, but the change is in timing and variability. So today, a huge share of our inflow is stored as snow through winter, and it's released in the spring and early summer melt. So Norwegian snowpack is a giant natural reservoir. And as it warms, then more winter precipitation will fall as rain instead of snow, and the snow that does fall will melt earlier. So inflow shifts earlier in the year, and more of it arrives in autumn and winter when it used to be locked up.
These are very significant seasonal changes potentially, aren't they, Silja? But a very, very interesting point, and I think that's a little bit of a warning sign for the listeners and viewers out there. But Gro, Silja and Sigbjørn, thank you very much for being guests on the Plugged In podcast this week.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
And to you listeners, thanks for listening to this episode of Plugged In. If you enjoyed this discussion, please like, rate and follow to make sure you get the latest podcast episodes as soon as we release them every Thursday. Finally, you can head to montelnews.com for more news and analysis from our team of journalists across Europe and beyond. See you next time.